I didn't think much of it when I heard the footsteps above my apartment at 2:13 a.m. The problem was I lived on the top floor. There was no apartment above mine, just the hollow, rotting space of an old, neglected attic. I moved to Columbus, Ohio in late 2023 for a new job. The city was gray, cold, and the rent was suspiciously low for the area. The building was a relic, an aging brick structure that smelled perpetually of damp carpet, industrial cleaner, and that faint, sickly, sweet scent of stagnant water hidden behind the walls. When I signed the lease, I asked the landlord, a man with sunken, glassy eyes who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s, why the rent was so cheap. He didn't even look up from his ledger, his pen scratched against the paper, a sound that felt like nails on a chalkboard. "People don't usually stay very long," he muttered. I laughed, trying to play it cool. He didn't. He just stared at me, his expression flat, as if he were waiting for me to quit before I'd even started. For the first 2 weeks, it was blissfully quiet. Then, the ceiling started talking. It wasn't the rhythmic thud of pipes or the building settling. It was the distinct, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of someone pacing across my living room ceiling. It always started at exactly 2:13 a.m. It always lasted 20 minutes, a slow, agonizing parade of footsteps that seemed to defy the geometry of the room, as if the person above were walking. Then came the cabinet. It was the one directly above my kitchen sink. I'd close it before bed, checking the latch until it clicked. And every single morning, it was hanging open exactly 3 inches. I thought I was losing my mind. I started taking photos of it at night, just to have proof. The photos remained the same every morning. The cabinet was open. It felt like a deliberate, taunting invitation, a way for someone to say, "I'm still here, and I'm watching you." I tried to talk to Linda, my neighbor across the hall. She was an elderly woman who kept her door chained, like she was afraid of a break-in. When I asked her casually if she ever heard the footsteps, the air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. She went pale. She clutched her door handle until her knuckles turned white. "Don't acknowledge it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Whatever you do, don't let it know you can hear it. It feeds on the attention." She slammed the door before I could ask what she meant. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. A week later, the escalation began. I came home from work to find a handwritten note on my kitchen table. No signature, no forced entry, just a piece of lined notebook paper. "Stop looking up." My blood turned to ice. I didn't know a soul in Ohio. My deadbolt was still engaged. My windows were locked from the inside. That night, the pacing above my bedroom changed. It wasn't walking anymore, it was dragging. A slow, wet sound, like a heavy burlap sack being hauled across floorboards. It moved from the corner of the attic, hovered over my kitchen, and then stopped, directly over my bed. Then 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was so sharp, so close, that I could see a tiny puff of plaster dust fall from the ceiling onto my bedsheet. I didn't sleep. I just stared into the darkness, my hand gripping my phone, waiting for the ceiling to break. The next day, the rational part of me died. I grabbed a flashlight and a heavy wrench, my heart hammering against my ribs, and forced the building's attic access hatch in the hallway open. I climbed up into the darkness. The air up there was stifling, thick with the smell of old insulation, mothballs, and something metallic, the smell of a confined, unwashed human body. The attic was a graveyard of abandoned lives. There were half-empty water bottles crusted over food containers, and a thin, filthy mattress shoved into the dark corner. But the worst part was the floor. Whoever had been living up there had drilled dozens of tiny, jagged holes through the insulation and the plaster ceiling below. They were peepholes, I could see the soft, amber glow of my living room light through them. They had been watching me sleep, eat, and exist for weeks. I felt like a bug under a microscope. I scrambled down, my hands shaking so violently I almost fell. The police came, but the attic was empty. They found the mattress and the filth, but the squatter was gone. A transient, they told me, acting like it was normal. Keep the doors locked. 2 nights later, I got a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have gone upstairs. I made it to the hotel, but the bright lights and the sounds of other people didn't bring me any peace. I felt like I hadn't just left the building. I felt like I had brought something back with me. One night, sitting alone in the hotel room, I decided to dig into the history of that old brick building. My hands were shaking and my entire body felt heavy with dread, but I had this sick, desperate obsession to know the truth. I pulled up the digitized news archives. The history of that place was darker than I could have imagined. In the 1980s, there was a caretaker there who simply never left. Legend had it that he lived in the crawl spaces behind the walls, watching, recording every single minute of the tenants' lives. He didn't just want to watch, he wanted to inhabit them. I convinced myself I was safe. I was miles away now. But the very next night, as I was trying to drift off to sleep, the hotel thermostat plummeted. The air grew sharp and brittle. I could see my own breath misting in the cold air, ghost white vapor swirling in the moonlight. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for sleep, when my phone chimed. A notification. It was that same unknown number, but this time there was no text, just a single audio file. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. The sound that filled the room wasn't static. It was my breathing. It was the sound of my own rhythmic deep sleep. My stomach turned to ice. He wasn't back at the apartment. He wasn't in the attic. He was here. He was in my suitcase, in my clothes, or perhaps he was hiding in my own shadow. A memory suddenly flashed in my mind, the dusty, forgotten diary I'd seen tucked away in the corner of that attic. I had left it behind, but I realized then that I hadn't left it alone. That night, as I walked into the bathroom to wash my face, the mirror was fogged up from the shower. Scrawled into the condensation, in a handwriting that looked like it had been etched by a claw, were these words: "You saw me. I saw you. Now, we aren't ever going to be apart." Then the sound came. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the ceiling of my hotel room. I was on the top floor. There was nothing above me but the roof. Yet someone was pacing, and this time it wasn't just walking. It felt like something was crouched over me. Fine flakes of plaster began to drift down from the ceiling, dusting my bed just like they did back at the apartment. I didn't look up. I knew better than to look up. I just squeezed my eyes shut and covered my ears, but it didn't matter. I felt a freezing, stagnant draft right behind my neck. It was the sensation of something or someone standing inches away, leaning in to breathe. It was a cold, labored breath that smelled of rotting insulation, mothballs, and years of trapped, suffocating silence. I thought moving to a modern, secure complex would be the end of it. I told myself it was just trauma, just the mind playing tricks after weeks of living in that nightmare. But the thing about true terror is that it doesn't just stop because you change your zip code. 3 nights into my stay at the new place, I woke up at exactly 2:13 a.m., not from a noise, but from a feeling. It was that same suffocating pressure in the air, the kind that makes your hair stand on end before you even open your eyes. I lay there in the dark, paralyzed, my heart hammering against my ribs, refusing to acknowledge the silence. "It's just your imagination," I told myself. "You're safe now. You're miles away from that rot." Then I felt it. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my own breath misting in the air, a ghost white vapor in the moonlight. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, but then came the sound. It wasn't a footstep this time. It was the sound of a fingernail, slow, deliberate, and agonizingly sharp, dragging across the plaster of the ceiling. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I grabbed my phone, not to call the police, but to record. I had to know if I was finally losing my mind. I held the device up toward the ceiling, my hands trembling so hard the phone rattled. I let it record for an hour, praying for nothing. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to listen. I waited until I was sitting in my car, in the bright, crowded parking lot of a grocery store, surrounded by people, by daylight, by logic. I put my headphones on and hit play. For the first 40 minutes, there was nothing but the hum of the air conditioner. But then, at 2:53 a.m., the exact time the door had closed in my old apartment, the audio spiked. It wasn't the sound of a floorboard or a cabinet, it was a voice. A wet, raspy, strained whisper that sounded like someone who hadn't spoken in years. It was so close to the microphone that I could hear the wet click of a tongue. It didn't say my name, it didn't threaten me, it just whispered, "Still looking, aren't you?" I dropped the phone. The screen cracked. I deleted the file, but it didn't matter. I know the truth now. That thing, that entity, it wasn't just a squatter. It was a parasite. And once it finds a host, once it learns how you live, how you breathe, how you fear, it doesn't leave. It just waits for you to settle into your next safe home. And now, every night, I don't just worry about the 2:13 a.m. knock. I worry about what's happening when I'm not looking. I worry about the attic that I can't see, and the fact that no matter how modern the building is, there is always a space above. Months later, out of morbid curiosity, I looked up the building's address on some old archived forums. I found posts from previous tenants. The kitchen cabinet, one post read, "Every morning, open 3 inches. Even after I moved out, I still check it." The attic, another said, "I found the mattress. They were watching. They're still watching." I'm in a new place now, a first-floor unit in a modern, secure complex. Everything is new. Everything is bright. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, the clock ticks over to 2:13 a.m. And for a split second, I swear I hear the floorboards above me groan under the weight of someone standing perfectly still. I don't look up. I've learned my lesson. You never, ever look up.